Chapter 5 of Father Goriot by Honore de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Perry. Chapter 5. At 4 o'clock that evening, when Goriot came in, he saw, by the light of two smoky lamps, that Victorine's eyes were red. Madame Vauquer was listening to the history of the visit made that morning to Monsieur Taillefer. It had been made in vain. Taillefer was tired of the annual application made by his daughter and her elderly friend. He gave them a personal interview in order to arrive at an understanding with them. "My dear lady," said Madame Couture, addressing Madame Vauquer, "just imagine it. He did not even ask Victorine to sit down; she was standing the whole time. He said to me quite coolly, without putting himself in a passion, that we might spare ourselves the trouble of going there, that the young lady, he would not call her his daughter, was injuring her cause by importuning him. Importuning! Once a year, the wretch! That as Victorine's mother had nothing when he married her, Victorine ought not to expect anything from him. In fact, he said the most cruel things that made the poor child burst out crying. The little thing threw herself at her father's feet and spoke up bravely. She said that she only persevered in her visits for her mother's sake, that she would obey him without a murmur, but that she begged him to read her poor dead mother's farewell letter. She took it up and gave it to him, saying the most beautiful things in the world, most beautifully expressed. I do not know where she learned them. God must have put them into her head, for the poor child was inspired to speak so nicely that it made me cry like a fool to hear her talk. And what do you think the monster was doing all the time? Cutting his nails. He took the letter that poor Madame Taillefer had soaked with tears and flung it on to the chimney-piece. 'That is all right,' he said. He held out his hands to raise his daughter, but she covered them with kisses, and he drew them away again. Scandalous, isn't it? And his great booby of a son came in and took no notice of his sister." "What inhuman wretches they must be!" said Father Goriot. "And then they both went out of the room," Madame Couture went on, without heeding the worthy vermicelli maker's exclamation. "Father and son bowed to me and asked me to excuse them on account of urgent business. That is the history of our call. Well, he has seen his daughter at any rate. How he can refuse to acknowledge her, I cannot think, for they are as alike as two peas." The boarders dropped in one after another, interchanging greetings and empty jokes that certain classes of Parisians regard as humorous and witty. Dullness is their prevailing ingredient, and the whole point consists in mispronouncing a word or a gesture. This kind of argot is always changing. The essence of the jest consists in some catchword suggested by a political event, an incident in the police courts, a street song, or a bit of burlesque at some theatre, and forgotten in a month. Anything and everything serves to keep up a game of battledore and shuttlecock with words and ideas. The diorama, a recent invention which carried an optical illusion a degree further than panoramas, had given rise to a mania among art students for ending every word with rama. The Maison Vauquer had caught the infection from a young artist among the boarders. "Well, Monsieur Poiret," said the employe from the museum, "how is your healthorama?" Then, without waiting for an answer, he turned to Madame Couture and Victorine with a "Ladies, you seem melancholy." "Is dinner ready?" cried Horace Bianchon, a medical student and a friend of Rastignac's. "My stomach is sinking usque ad tolones." "There is an uncommon frozerama outside," said Vautrin. "Make room there, Father Goriot. Confound it, your foot covers the whole front of the stove." "Illustrious Monsieur Vautrin," put in Bianchon, "why do you say frozerama? It is incorrect, it should be frozenrama." "No, it shouldn't," said the official from the museum. "Frozerama is right by the same rule that you say, 'My feet are froze.'" "Ah, ah!" Here is His Excellency the Marquis de Rastignac, Doctor of the Law of Contraries," cried Bianchon, seizing Eugène by the throat and almost throttling him. "Hallo there, hallo!" Mademoiselle Michonneau came noiselessly in, bowed to the rest of the party, and took her place beside the three women without saying a word. "That old bat always makes me shudder," said Bianchon in a low voice, indicating Mademoiselle Michonneau to Vautrin. "I have studied Gall's system, and I am sure she has the bump of Judas." "Then you have seen a case before?" said Vautrin. "Who has not?" answered Bianchon. "Upon my word, that ghastly old maid looks just like one of the long worms that will gnaw a beam through, give them time enough." "That is the way, young man," returned he of the 40 years and the dyed whiskers. "The rose has lived the life of a rose, a morning's space." "Aha! Here is a magnificent soup-orama!" cried Poiret, as Christophe came in bearing the soup with cautious heed. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Madame Vauquer. "It is soup aux choux." All the young men roared with laughter. "Had you there, Poiret?" "Poirette, she had you there." "Score 2 points to Mamma Vauquer," said Vautrin. "Did any of you notice the fog this morning?" asked the official. "It was a frantic fog," said Bianchon, "a fog unparalleled, doleful, melancholy, sea green, asthmatical, a Goriot of a fog." "A Goriorama," said the art student, "because you couldn't see a thing in it." "Hey, milord Goriot, they are talking about you." Father Goriot, seated at the lower end of the table, close to the door through which the servant entered, raised his face. He had smelt at a scrap of bread that lay under his table napkin, an old trick acquired in his commercial capacity that still showed itself at times. "Well," Madame Vauquer cried in sharp tones that rang above the rattle of spoons and plates and the sound of other voices, "and is there anything the matter with the bread?" "Nothing whatever, madame," he answered. "On the contrary, it is made of the best quality of corn, flour from Etampes." "How could you tell?" asked Eugène. "By the color, by the flavor." "You knew the flavor by the smell, I suppose," said Madame Vauquer. "You have grown so economical, you will find out how to live on the smell of cooking at last." "Take out a patent for it then," cried the museum official. "You would make a handsome fortune." "Never mind him," said the artist. "He does that sort of thing to delude us into thinking that he was a vermicelli maker." "Your nose is a corn sampler, it appears?" inquired the official. "Corn what?" asked Bianchon. "Cornel, cornet, cornelian, cornus, cornucopia, corncrake, corncockle, cornorama." The 8 responses came like a rolling fire from every part of the room, and the laughter that followed was the more uproarious because poor Father Goriot stared at the others with a puzzled look, like a foreigner trying to catch the meaning of words in a language which he does not understand. "Corn," he said, turning to Vautrin, his next neighbor. "Corn on your foot, old man," said Vautrin, and he drove Father Goriot's cap down over his eyes by a blow on the crown. The poor old man thus suddenly attacked was for a moment too bewildered to do anything. Christophe carried off his plate, thinking that he had finished his soup, so that when Goriot had pushed back his cap from his eyes, his spoon encountered the table. Every one burst out laughing. "You are a disagreeable joker, sir," said the old man. "And if you take any further liberties with me—" "Well, what then, old boy?" Vautrin interrupted. "Well, then, you shall pay dearly for it some day." "Down below, eh?" said the artist, "in the little dark corner where they put naughty boys." "Well, mademoiselle," Vautrin said, turning to Victorine, "you are eating nothing. So papa was refractory, was he?" "A monster," said Madame Couture. "Mademoiselle might make application for aliment pending her suit. She is not eating anything. Just see how Father Goriot is staring at Mademoiselle Victorine." The old man had forgotten his dinner; he was so absorbed in gazing at the poor girl. The sorrow in her face was unmistakable, the slighted love of a child whose father would not recognize her. "We are mistaken about Father Goriot, my dear boy," said Eugene in a low voice. "He is not an idiot, nor wanting in energy. Try your gall system on him, and let me know what you think. I saw him crush a silver dish last night, as if it had been made of wax. There seems to be something extraordinary going on in his mind just now, to judge by his face. His life is so mysterious that it must be worth studying. Oh, you may laugh, Bianchon, I am not joking." "The man is a subject, is he?" said Bianchon. "All right, I will dissect him, if he will give me the chance." "No, feel his bumps." His stupidity might perhaps be contagious." End of chapter 5.